Administration. It's a job, but it's a great job, and that's what I just want to share with you today, that the job of an administrator is a delightful undertaking. Administration is the process or activity of running a business or organization. That's what our definition would be. But while that's the given definition, I propose there is far more to administration in your classical school than simply filling out paperwork, checking boxes, attending meetings, and nodding your head. Yes, you will do all of those things, especially the nodding of the head. However, in a classical school, we are different. So many times in a different school setting that is not classical, we would say in public education, or even in many Christian schools with a different mindset than a classical Christian school, there is a big stress on gatherings where we check boxes and fill out forms. And while that's important, in a classical school, we are so much more about the heart and the minds of our students. And so we have different priorities. The task of administration is a gift, but it's also a grave responsibility. Each one of you are tasked with affecting the hearts and minds of your staff, with love for an old culture that is foreign to the modern age. As classical educators, we seek to renew a love for all that has been lost. And it is not easy, and it is not for the faint-hearted. It is a high calling to be the teacher of teachers. Your work, whether for good or bad, will affect the world. That is big, and it's grave, and it's a serious responsibility. Administration requires wisdom. There's no escaping that fact. This is a leadership position, and if you are not a person who feels comfortable taking the lead, then administration is probably not for you. There's nothing wrong with that. We must understand that though we live in a culture that tells us we can train for a position, pass the test, receive the degree, and we will know what to do and when to do it, that is not the end of our learning. We in the classical world are not utilitarian in our view. We do not focus on the mediocrity of the latest method. There is wisdom involved in administration and a way of applying that wisdom as you lead your school. If we believe that the existence of truth, goodness, and beauty can be seen in all things, then they must be seen in the role of administration. Yours is a beautiful calling. For classical education leads to viewing life from an eternal perspective. It changes us, and it will change our teachers. With this in mind, let me share with you 10 areas that speak to wisdom in the everyday work of administration. So we're going to look at 10 areas, and sometimes I shy from giving a number because of our society and the way that so many books are sold, 10 reasons for, or 10 ways you can do this and 7 ways you can do that, and that's too simple. It simplifies things. But for our purposes today, I just wanted to focus on these 10 points, that it might help us. I hope it will help you in your situations. Number 1, the wise administrator is always learning, ever growing, drinking in knowledge. We never come to the end. If you think because you now have your master's in classical education, you've got this thing, then you haven't got this thing. God calls us to always be learning and growing. You are in charge of a staff. That staff needs to be learning from you. If you have to be the one pouring into them, you have to have much more pouring into you, so you are teaching from the overflow. So you continue. Books must be your daily diet. For if you take nothing in, you will have nothing to give. You must love to learn, and you must constantly be on the alert for good reading material. Yes, we know there are many books on methods of administration, growing a school, self-help methods that people can pursue. But how much better to take the advice of those wise souls who have gone before us and paved the way with their words. You must make friends with the ancients. Their wisdom must easily fall from your lips. This will prepare you as you lead teachers in the present age. For you are leading a group of souls in an endeavor to renew a love for good and lasting things, to revive a deep and thorough thought process, to encourage hearts toward what is most important in life. And so you see, it's a calling, and it's deep, and it's not to be taken lightly. Likewise, your teachers. Ask yourself, are my teachers reading on their own? Am I assigning reading? Do we talk about books we are reading? Often, staff meetings are comprised of going over work that is done or you're planning that it will be done. And that's important, we understand. But so is spending time talking about books and promoting a love of good reading in your staff. Yes, they can teach a class by preparing a lesson and knowing the subject, but they will teach better when they are infused with a love of reading and learning. So important. And they will not be infused with a love of reading and learning unless you are, and you show them by example. So, number one job of an administrator is that you are always learning and growing and reading and pouring in. Number two, the wise administrator sees the importance of the inner man. If you agree with Aristotle that educating the mind without educating the heart is a danger, then you must realize that as an administrator, you have a responsibility to minister to both the mind and the heart of your staff. When you remind your teachers that the classroom is a sacred place, a place where both the heart and mind will be affected, you will also be reminded that there is a sacredness to administration. The opportunity to touch another's life is a serious undertaking. And indeed, as you lead your teachers, just so will they lead their students. Are you encouraging them to take time for personal study, for contemplation, for reflection, not just reading, but that quiet time alone of thinking? Developing a shared vision is encouraged when we find our affections are headed in the same direction. Sweet time is spent mulling over great works and the thoughts presented in them. There must be a definite slowing down, an appreciation for time spent in discussion and reflection. Rather than espousing the idea that learning has an end, the wise administrator is concerned with his or her own spiritual life and growing closer to God, as well as being aware of the needs of his or her staff in that same area. You may think, oh, well, let's ask, how large are our schools that are represented in here? Do we have anyone with more than 100 students in their school? So 200? 3?
No, about 147.
147, okay. And?
132.
Yeah. And the rest are smaller than that or larger?
About 250.
250, okay. So for the most part, I mean, what would we consider as a large Christian school? I should tell you a little about myself. Were any of you in my other session? No. Okay, so then I won't be redundant. Okay, good. I live near Flagstaff, Arizona, and I work for Memoria Press. And I work with schools from Texas to the West Coast. And so I visit a lot of schools and do teacher training of implementation of curriculum, teacher observation, that sort of thing. So I work with a lot of different schools. And I would tell you this, of the primarily classical Christian schools is what I'm working with because we publish classical Christian curriculum. We have about 700 schools in the United States that use our program, or our curriculum. But visiting all of these schools, you get a view of what is out there. And really, in truth, it's the small classical Christian schools that are carrying the movement. You have very few schools. I have visited a few that have 800, 1,000 students. But for the most part, and our flagship school in Kentucky has 750, so that's a larger school. But for the most part, classical Christian schools are going to be probably, most of them are 200 or less. So I always want to say to schools, don't ever feel intimidated when you go to a conference, because all the other schools are just like you. They really are. We are all doing a new thing. It's very old, but now it's very new, right? And so you always want to say to administrators, don't just think you're a little administrator out in a rural area and da-da-da and you don't matter. No. You, in God's eyes, He has a fantastic work for you to do. Not because you are great, but because the work you're doing is so great. And then when you consider that you have your staff, that is, you are ministering to these souls, right? So what you put forth for them, we know that leadership affects everything on the way down. Your mannerisms, the way you look at education, all of that is going to be reflected in your teachers if they're with you for any amount of time at all. And that's why we need to get a handle on what do we need to be doing as administrators of classical Christian schools. And I would say, I hate to say administrators, I mean, as people, right? We should all be learning and growing. We should all be pushing excellently forward to what we need to be, right? Because classical education, which should be our life, it helps us to become something different than we were, if we truly are committed to that, because it's commitment to God and His view of life and everything. So it encompasses our whole life. Number 3, a wise administrator will grow in adversity. Yes, you will. You know, you probably already have experienced that. Because classical education is regarded as a new endeavor, even though we know it's very old, you will meet teachers who are fine people, yet they need to gain a fuller understanding of what we are really about. That is probably the biggest thing that I see as I visit different schools. The biggest need in our classical Christian schools, one is teachers, because most schools can't pay a very high salary, and the other is re-education of teachers. So you hire someone, you were desperate, you needed a teacher, school was going to start. You did an interview, you hired that teacher. You get 2 months into the school year and you realize she has a John Dewey progressive mindset. What are you going to do? You need to meet with her, you need to deal with this, you need to work through that, right? It's not always easy. There are times of adversity. There are also times of adversity when someone a parent loves the word classical, and they have placed their child in your school because classical drew them. They didn't know what it meant, but it sounded really, really nice. And so, has anybody had this happen? Yes, there's a little misunderstanding, isn't there? So 50% of the job often in our classical Christian schools is re-educating teachers. Another 25 is teaching parents. And this will always happen because you always have new parents. You'll always be educating parents as to what classical education really is. That's always going to be happening. That's part of our job, right? And probably the other 25 is simply running the school, doing tours, and all of those other things. But a large part of your time is re-education of teachers. That you have to have something organized where you can do that, where you are focusing on doing that. You have got to be prepared for that. You will have to realize that you will probably not gain a following as the Pied Piper of Hamelin. That's probably not going to happen to you. There will be those who have been enlightened by the progressive mindset, and they will not agree when you share your love for the old truths that have stood the test of time. 'Twas ever thus. Truth has always collided with falsity. You will come upon that young and very smart teacher who is quite sure that the new methods are the best methods. And he or she knows this. They just know. Let me show you this new thing that I learned. Or you will have an old teacher who is sure that the way it was is the way it should be, and classrooms have survived without Latin for the last 50 years. Sad classrooms. It is your job to bring those people along and to work through all of that. And you will not be defeated or dissuaded by either of these situations. They will simply strengthen your belief that there is a great need for this excellent education. You will be challenged as you share the richness of great books and deep study. The young teacher's eyes will light up with understanding, while the older teacher suddenly notices Latin roots in everything she reads. You will smile to yourself and resolve to continue this grand journey. Suddenly, your job is not a job. It is your love. And you will rejoice as you see others delight in learning. Seeing difficulties as a time to grow and learning how to look at things objectively rather than defensively is a must for any wise administrator. I know it's easy when you're getting a little bit of pushback from teachers or families. It can be a little overwhelming, and maybe you're in the middle of that situation and you can let it just come upon you, but you need to not do that. You need to be objective. You need to be outside of it. You need to realize this is a new thing, and although I know it's a very good and excellent thing, they don't. And so I must help them through this. And you walk them through it. You plan meetings for your parents where you can explain a little more about classical education whenever you get an opportunity. If you have a Christmas program, you put in a little 5-minute talk about someone inside of classical education throughout history. You will do that whenever you can. You might, in your newsletter, put a little blurb about something. Don't make it long and overwhelming and they can't handle it. Drip by drip, you drip all of these things of classical education into their hearts and minds until, after a while, they know them and they don't even realize that you've done that. It's a wonderful thing, and you will have that parent come in who might have had an issue when they first put their child in your school, and 3 months into the year, they came home and they were talking about their Latin. And the parent said, "What in the world? That's a dead language." And you said, you might say to them, "Don't do a post-mortem on it." That's a Latin word, you know. It's good. And they don't believe you. And then a few months later, they come back and they say, "Wow, my child is reading and they're noticing this word. They're saying they come from Latin, and oh, their child's learning." And now this parent feels so good. My child knows things. You can do that with your parents who you are getting pushback from. You just need to work it through. That teacher who's struggling, that teacher who came out of that progressive school, and she just didn't, why are we doing recitation? Rote memorization? Are you kidding me? Do you know what Dewey said about John Dewey? Direct quote of John Dewey on memorization. Rote memorization is not good because it makes students be submissive to authority. Really? That's a bad thing? Maybe we need a little more rote memorization in our society. So you might have the teacher who pushes back against that. Maybe you didn't realize that when you hired them, because we're not perfect and we don't do everything correctly every time, and you were desperate, and maybe you were in a rural area, and you can work it through. You can get them to the point where they, "Oh, that is great. Do you know what they memorized? Wow, they memorized the Dwarf's poem. Oh, that was amazing." Right? I don't know where I strayed when I gave my introduction, but I must have gone off on a limb somewhere because I don't remember giving all of it. So I work with schools. My husband and I have 6 children, and we live in Arizona, and we live in the mountains, and when I'm not traveling the West, I go home to our home, which is on a 150,000 acre cattle ranch. And there's nothing that will bring you more reality and more truth than being with the earth. That is so true, right? It is amazing. A few weeks ago, I was in Southern California, and driving in the Los Angeles area and being pretty much overwhelmed by everything. It was the weekend that Kobe Bryant died, and it's just crazy there. And when I got home and drove up into the mountains, what a relief, right? I'm so thankful that God, our children are grown now, but that God has provided this place of solitude, and it is reassuring me again and again when I think of people how important it is for us to have times of solitude. You as administrators need times of solitude. You need to put away the phone, put away the screen, and just let it go, because you will be stronger for it. I didn't really have that in here, but I just am adding that because it's important. So, yeah, I just wanted to say that. Came to my mind as I was thinking about all of those schools. Number 4, the wise administrator communicates well. If you don't, you need to look objectively at yourself. Think about yourself. Sometimes when our teachers don't understand, it's not because they're being obstinate, it's because we're not communicating well. We have to be honest with ourselves that we do communicate well. For some people it's easier than others. And so we need to look at any way that we can improve. At this time in history, we have more ways to communicate than ever before, and yet we find our society fractured in our communication skills. We have broken relationships, we have broken families, all of it falling apart, and yet we can't take that phone out of our hand because we've always got to be communicating. But that's not deep communication. And so we are going to lose our ability to communicate by destroying our language and by not being face-to-face, person-to-person, my eyes and your eyes, and we are going to communicate with one another. And that is part of classical education. Sitting there and learning how to communicate and how to be a part of a community, how to have civil discourse. We can discuss something even if we don't agree. You might have gone over teacher observations, and now you have that teacher in your office and you're going over the observation, and maybe hers wasn't good, but it's got to be discussed. And we have to learn how to communicate. So be honest with yourself and think about that. Am I communicating well? Now, I will tell you this. As soon as you become an administrator, even if you were a teacher in that school and then you move to being the administrator, the day you become that administrator, you are separate. You didn't do anything. They will view you as being separate, and that's okay. It's leadership. Accept it. You're not one of the girls or one of the boys anymore. You're in a different position, and that's okay. And so now you have to set a high standard, and you have to live up to it if you expect anyone else to live up to it. Joseph Piper, have you read him at all? He's grand. In his beautiful little book, he has these little books which are great if you, like, we should have 4 or 5 books going all the time, right? This is so important. We should have a book on education. We should have a book on something that we're interested in. There are always books to be read. We should have a spiritual book. We should have 4 or 5 books laying around our house that we're in the middle of. That's how much we should be reading. One thing that has been absolutely grand for my husband and I is that where we have lived, we don't have any TV. And it's quite glorious to spend an evening sitting on the front porch looking out at the San Francisco peaks topped with snow with a cup of coffee and each of us with our book. It's wonderful. And we need to be doing these things. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Well, Joseph Piper, in his beautiful little book, it's called Only the Lover Sings, and it's about beauty. And he says, man's ability to see is in decline. And he's right. We talk about critical thinking skills and all of this, and I will just put a plug in here that if we will teach our children Latin from an early age, grammar-based Latin, not just singing a song here and there and we don't know what it means, but grammar-based, it organizes the mind. It actually helps with all organization of the mind and thinking well. But anyway, people don't think anymore. I'm sure that every one of you has had an example where you've thought, they just don't think. Because our society, with the onset of technology to such an extent, is killing us in the thinking area. So when he says man's ability to see is in decline, he's right. We're in a fix. Some are looking for a way to see, and many blind to the ailment. In a world of cryptic texts and emojis, you must be the one to elevate the language, to encourage an appreciation for the beauty of communication. Words are important. We must always realize words are important. I will say this in almost every talk I give. I'm going to talk about words. Because, for one thing, how does God talk to us? In His Word. Language is very, very important. You must know how to use words wisely, and you must guard your language skills fiercely. Always think before you write or speak, and always be aware of guiding your teachers in developing better communication skills. Language is a beautiful thing, but you must be the one to raise the standard, to promote a love of words and how to use them. Never accept poor grammar or overuse of terms. If I hear the word awesome one more time, I just don't know what I'm going to do. It's really funny because when I was an administrator, I was strict about language. And I can still meet students who were in my school and now have graduated, and they will not use the word awesome around me because I had to attack it because they were not using any other adjectives. It was the only thing they knew. People, there is excellent, there is superb, there is magnificent. There are lovely words that are out there. Could we just use our language? You need to do this with your teachers. And if they're using double negatives, take care of it. If we are going to say that we as classical schools are excellent, then our speech needs to be excellent. So that administrator of a school, you've got to deal with that. We can't just say, well, we just don't do that. Yes, we do. God said we need to do everything excellently, and so we are going to. Make your speech beautiful, and other people will notice. You will find, because we have a lack of trained teachers, that you will often be the one to introduce your teachers to Cicero and to guide them in their skills of rhetoric. Speak well, and the goodness and beauty of your speech will inspire your teachers. That is very, very true. If you do not show a respect for language and a concern for proper speaking, you will contribute to a downfall in the educational climate of your school. I cannot stress how important that is. Very, very important. Here is a quote from a book, Wisdom and Eloquence. It's by Little John and Evans. And it talks about classical education. It says it's a paradigm for classical education. There are a few things that, it's one of those books that's a great reference book. There will be some things in it that you'll say, yeah, I like that, maybe not that. It's called Wisdom and Eloquence. And it speaks of Augustine's view of speech. And he says, the first requirement of the expositor or teacher, and one of Augustine's important concessions in favor of a practical rather than a philosophical rhetoric, is that he be wise, if not eloquent. We have this stress. We need to understand. Also from Augustine, he says, whether one is just now making ready to speak, or is comprising something to be spoken later or to be read, he should pray that God may place a good speech in his mouth, And for the profitable result of their speech, they should give thanks to him, from whom they should not doubt they have received it, so that he who glories may glory in him, whose hand are both we and our words. Words are important, and to this day, the people who wield words well, try saying that 3 times fast, they will end up being the leaders in a situation. And so you need to be aware of that if you are a leader. I know I really stress this, but it is just so incredibly important. I actually stress this to the teachers too. If you had any teachers attend my other session, and I will share this with you. Because teachers, you really need to make this clear to your teachers. In this day, when people insist on texting with letters instead of words or pictures instead of words, and I know it's quick and I know it's easy, but you know what? It's destroying our language. And we have a joke in the office because they know that when I chat on Hangouts, I'm not going to send any pictures. I'm going to write words. Cavemen write pictures, I use words. And this is understood. And so we joke about it with the 30-somethings, but they don't want me to call them millennials because they feel that's an insult, and I don't know even where that goes. But the point of the matter is we are destroying our language. I should say we're allowing it to be destroyed. So if there's a place where you can hold up the banner of the English language, we need to be doing that, because it's very, very important. And in the end, your students will be the ones who are different than the world, and that is just as it should be. They should be different. They should speak well. They should not be the same as everyone else. So, number 5. The wise administrator not only provides opportunities to learn, but desires to inspire teachers who have not yet caught the vision to learn. So you have that teacher, he or she is struggling, they don't have a vision, they don't care, and rather than saying, oh, that just really bothers me, you need to say, oh, I just really, really want to inspire that person. I want to help that person to the next level. I want to help them to learn what this is all about and to want to learn what this is all about. You may not see yourself as an inspirational figure. However, it's important to accept that responsibility. Your teachers are the leaders who make a difference in the school and the lives of your students for good or bad. It is beautiful to see a teacher who did not seem to display an interest in deeper study suddenly catch the vision, and they will. You will find, because we have a lack of classically trained teachers, that you will be the one to introduce your teachers to the great men of old. There are few schools of learning that will prepare teachers in this way, and so you must take up the mantle. You must listen and hear, see and observe. You must purpose to know your teachers, prescribing a plan for learning more yourself, and helping them to fashion a plan for deeper learning also. Very, very important. As you are a teacher to your teachers, really you are, especially in a small school, I want you to listen to this directive that Quintilian gave, a directive to teachers. Let him, the teacher, be strict, but not austere. Genial, but not too familiar. For austerity will make him unpopular, and familiarity breeds contempt. Let his discourse continually turn on what is good and honorable. The more he admonishes, the less he will have to punish. He must control his temper without, however, shutting his eyes to faults requiring correction. And we could say that about an administrator. All of those things. It's a balance. God's the only one who can give you the grace and strength to do it. But you need to be aware that it is a balance, and it is something that you have to do. Number 6. The wise administrator must be a believer. Many methods of education have been introduced in the last 50 years. Every few years they come along with something else, right? This will cure everything, right? They all promise to help students learn more, and they guarantee to help teachers improve their teaching skills. Yet, what do we find? Our society is still yearning for an answer. They're still looking for other things, that hidden something, until it has become the accepted belief that the true teacher is to be constantly looking for truth yet never finding it. That is something that is happening in our culture, that a true teacher never says, this is it. That they always say, well, I don't know. Like that's wise? No, no, that is not wise. We have truth, and we can give truth, and we can say there is truth, the truth. Like it's not yours and yours and yours, but the truth. We're allowed to say that. Not because we're great, but God is great, so we can say that. That's not wisdom, pretending that we can never know anything. It is foolishness. Classical education, having stood the test of time, provides the answer. Here is truth. This is not a method. This is not a choice among choices. This is truth. And if we believe all truth is God's truth, then we are in possession of great and powerful wisdom, which, when shared and embraced, results in change. A thorough study of Cicero's 5 principles of rhetoric would be wise for any administrator when presenting information to teachers. Your job is neither dry nor boring, and you should never approach it as such. There is no room for an administrator who does not thoroughly embrace classical education. It's okay to be excited. It's okay to know that you know. It doesn't mean you're holier than thou. You know this is good stuff, and you can say that. And you need to be the believer in that. Number 7, a wise administrator sees past methodology to content. Past methodology to content. There are many methods, new ones being invented all the time. But what we are concerned about is the content, what is inside of that. If there is one thing that is killing education, it is the idea that if we cover a certain amount of prescribed material using a certain method, then we have done our job. The idea is not to examine exactly what is in the material, but rather to complete all the required steps. Utilitarian education. The old example of cutting off the ends of the ham. Why? Well, simply because that's the way it was done. I'm reminded of the term modern madness of method. Martin Cawthron has this in one of his articles. And he talks about the infernal searching for new methods that is so popular in this time. And it is. We have become so addicted to methods that the emptiness of content goes unobserved. An example of this would be in our society. If you go into any governmental office today, you're directed from desk to desk so everyone can touch the paper, because that's what we do. And you can't work around anything, and there can't ever be any exceptions made, because that's what we do. We don't think, we just do this process. Unfortunately, this way of looking at things has trickled down to our places of learning. And it can be seen in schools today that are top-heavy, too much administration, too much adherence to paperwork, much talk of how to document all things, and yet little attention paid to what is actually going on in the classroom. And that's what we're there for. Knowing that a classical education is defined by its content and simply supported by its method, we minimize the paperwork to maximize the learning. Number 8. A wise administrator frees teachers to teach the basics. And these days, when we are so wrapped up in process, we can be led away from the clear truth of simplicity and become completely lost in prescribed activities. C.S. Lewis, in his essay on the reading of old books, he says this: "There's a strange idea abroad that in every subject, the ancient book should be read only by the professionals, and that the amateur should content himself with the modern books. If the average student wants to find out something about Platonism, the very last thing he thinks of doing is to take a translation of Plato off the library shelf. He would rather read some dreary modern book 10 times as long, all about isms and influences, and only once in 12 pages telling him what Plato actually said. And you know, that's true. Rather than going and finding the book itself and reading it, people want someone to tell them what it said. We need to get past that. We need to free teachers to teach the real thing. As usual, Lewis is right. For some reason, we've turned from reading the original, the real, and the true, and instead embraced a false idea that by walking around a subject and discussing it outside of the actual work, we are accomplishing something. What we do not really know, but we insist that we are now enlightened. We have had discussions, our students feel good about themselves, and so we must have met the prescribed goal. This is contrary to true learning. Teachers need to be guided and encouraged to stick to the basics, the heart of the subject. It is truly a comfort and a help when we give our teachers permission to teach the basics deeply and thoroughly, multum non multum, much not many. Deep, rather than insisting on filling the hours of each day trying to focus on the kerfuffle that so often stands in the way of true learning. Administration consists of time alone and time together. That means that you will need time alone for personal study, and you will need time with your teachers to learn about them and to encourage and develop a learning relationship with them. We are people. We are not machines. In our humanness, we have a need to connect and understand. You are leading a team of intrepid souls, for true teachers are fearless in their search for truth, and it is an adventure to travel with them. Affecting the world is a hefty endeavor and must be taken seriously. But you will find yourself rewarded in ways you never imagined. Dedication to truth is a grand thing. It is a beautiful thing, and it is surely a good thing. Number 9. The wise administrator is full of hope. In the last 2 points, I want to address this regarding wise administration. These points are somewhat ethereal, but yet they are extremely important. The first is hope. A wise administrator pours hope into his or her teachers. You must hope for the very best that education has to offer. In your school, in your classrooms, you must be full of hope. We hope for a return to all that is true and good and beautiful in education. We hope each classroom is a place of deep learning and that students are imbued with a desire to know more. We want our teachers to have this hope too. It is very hard to hear teachers talking in a hopeless manner and hear them frustrated. That is a very, very sad, sad thing. We want our teachers to begin each day with the idea that wonderful learning will take place. We want them to be grateful for the opportunity to be involved in such a work. And that will not happen unless their administrator models it first. Yes, here and there you will find a teacher who is a natural hoper, but leadership lends its influence, and therefore you must be that hopeful leader. You know how much you enjoy that one teacher on your staff who just goes through every day, and that person is so happy, and they just love their children, and they just love everything. And they're so glad to see you, and they're so thankful for you. Right? You love that person. You want to be around that person. You may not be as perky as that person, but you need to be hopeful. You need to be like that person in the way of encouraging everyone. Because if you're stressed and you come in and you're downtrodden and you meet with your teachers and you've just had it, guess what? They will pick up on that and they will be the same way. Leadership, we have no excuses. We just have to accept that. That's how it has to be. In number 10, Lastly, the wise administrator is full of happiness. We want our classrooms to be structured and organized, and yet we also realize that very organization provides a place for happiness. When everything's a mess, everything's a mess. And we barely have room for happiness. But with structure and order in our classrooms, it leaves room for us to experience true happiness. And when a school is well ordered and the staff knows what is expected of them, just like in that classroom, when those children know the order of the day, they can relax and focus on learning because it's secure. They know every day this is going to happen this way. I have no worries. And the sad thing is, in this day and age, when God created families, He created the family as the place to have your security. And it was to be your best place, right? Unfortunately, because of the way our society is developing, often our school is that place. Maybe the children go home to dad for 2 nights and to mom for 2 nights. And maybe outside of school, things aren't as settled as they should be. And so it's really important that they know when they come to that classroom, this is what we do every day, this is orderly every day, that may be the only order they have in their life. I'm just going to be honest with you. And so the school then becomes their steady place. But you know what? You create that for your teachers. They need to have a steadiness in what they know is coming from you and what is going on in the school. So think about this. I just want to bring this up to you and you think about it. What is the atmosphere of your school? Think about that. Take time, maybe this week when you go back, to walk the halls and just to observe what is going on in your school. And think about when you conduct your teacher observations. How's that going for you? How are you communicating? Notice the atmosphere in that room as you're talking to that teacher. Think about everything that's going on. Looking at your school, consider, is it a happy place? Peace, Aquinas says, is the tranquility of order. Peace is the tranquility of order. We live in a chaotic world. Life in America has become a race to see who can do the most in the least amount of time. You sit and you listen to the conversation swirling around you in almost any setting, and what are you going to hear? You will hear people sharing how busy they are, as if busyness is the epitome of success. Oh, I'm so busy. Oh, I have so much on my plate. I have to run here. I have to run there. Oh. That's not good. We need to slow down. The responsible person, the productive person, according to them, is running hither and thither. You would think that there must be evidence for that being a good thing, but there is not. The only evidence that we are seeing for all of that is exhaustion, high blood pressure, stressed and broken families, worn out people who spend their lives talking about all they do and how they must plan a time of escape. It's all very disconcerting, isn't it? Well, referring again to Aquinas and his definition of peace is the tranquility of order, I want to just tell you of an example, something that I saw. I remember this little girl. She was a kindergartner and came into my school. And she was a frightened child. Her life was in upheaval because of parental difficulties. And at first, not knowing the lay of the land, she was unable to focus. And her beginning weeks of school were a time of great adjustment for her. She would often cry. She didn't like to play with others. But after a few weeks, she began to come to school smiling, and she was glad to be there. And she began to participate. She was gloriously happy. Why? Yes, it was the order of the day. She knew that when she came in, her teacher would greet her at the gate. She knew that her teacher would show her where to hang her coat, that she would have the same place to sit every day. She knew the order of the subjects would always be the same, and that if she raised her hand properly, she would be able to ask or answer a question. She experienced the delightful feeling of knowing what would come next. And it was new, and it freed her mind to learn, increasing her ability to focus on the task before her. At school there was order, and in that order there was peace. It was a taste of all that is good and true and beautiful, and it stemmed from an orderly classroom. And you see, it is the same for you as administrators with your teachers. When they know what's coming, when you do it without drama, when you are objective, when you are pouring into them, when they are learning to trust your leadership, you create that atmosphere where then they are then able to focus on doing what is good and true and beautiful in their classroom. That's the secret of the administrator. You can do those things in your schools with God's help. There must be an understood leader, and there must be understood followers. And you need to realize that in your position as a leader, you are separate from your staff, although you love them. It will always be. That is the way leadership is designed. And when you go to a conference, you may find that some of your teachers are huddling over here and joking and laughing, and you're outside of it, and that's okay. Because sometimes that happens. It's nothing against you. It's just the way leadership falls. That's the way it is. But at the same time, you are thinking of them. You are providing opportunities for them. You are pouring into them. You are constantly reading and learning and growing yourself, but not in a frenetic way, but in a way that is slow and steady, in a way that is deep and rich, multum non multum, much not many. In conclusion, I want to remind you that administration consists of time alone and time together. And so your life will consist of time alone and time together. Now, what is happening in your school daily? What is your daily routine? You might want to work an hour into your day where you're in your office just reading something really good. That's part of preparing. It's not all running around. Some of it is sitting still and filling ourselves. It's extremely important that we do that. So I will leave you with that, but we have a few minutes. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Anything that you as administrator, you observed in your school, or just any thoughts that came to you as I was speaking that you feel would be helpful to us to hear? Do you feel that any of this, oh, I know, one other thing. Wait, before we do that, one other thing I wanted to suggest to you. Have you all read the 7 Laws of Teaching? Have you read who has read the 7 Laws of Teaching? Okay. The 7 Laws of Teaching is a great book that you can use for training those teachers. I wanted to give you some resources because I'm saying, oh, your teacher should be reading, and then not giving you anything for them to read. And the 7 Laws of Teaching is a great book for that. The one reason I really like it is I love the content. It's actually written by John Milton Gregory for Sunday school teachers to help them teach in their Sunday schools in 1894. And we find ourselves reading it in our classical schools today because it's so good. But the nice thing about it, I believe it has 8 chapters. It has the introductory chapter and then a chapter on each of the 7 laws. The great thing about using it for staff training is that we have 9 months of our school year, or 9.5, 10. You can do a chapter every month, and you can have your teachers read a chapter and then have a staff meeting to go over that chapter. And that's just a great tool to use. It's an organized way of studying the book. It's not too much for them to read, but yet it walks them into some really good classical training. It's very, very good. There's also a book, Wisdom and Eloquence, that I mentioned. There's another book, The 7 Myths About Education. That book is by Daisy Christodoulos. She is British. It's actually examining the fall of education, 7 myths of education. She does it from a perspective of her situation in Britain, but we can apply it to the things that we experience here because so much of it is universal. Then, the best book ever to have on your shelf. Okay, I guess I can't say that. A fantastic book to have on your shelf if you don't is the book The Great Tradition. It's about this big. And it is collected writings of the great thinkers and scholars throughout the years, starting with Plato. And it is wonderful. You'll find Quintilian, my grand friend, in there. You'll find people throughout the ages and their selections from every one. That is great. You will never pick up that book and read through it. You will never do that. That is not what it is made for. It is made to pick up, I want to know what Quintilian thought. I want to know what Socrates thought. And you read some of each of them. It's a great way to know the greats. And you will find things in there that are just treasures. And I love, love, love the dedication at the beginning of the book. Richard Gamble, who put all of these writings together, he says that he wrote the book and he dedicates it to his teacher, whom he said had the courage to, I'm losing it now, had the courage to teach them basically that they were not to fit in, to the courage to make them different. You know what? That's as it should be. Are we wanting to raise our students to say, well, this is great classical education, but we want you to be the same as everyone else? Classical education changes us. We become different people. That's the difference between a Christian school that says, do these 10 things and you're a good Christian, and deep reading that changes us from the inside out. Right? So we want to be different. Anyway, that is a great, great book just to have on your shelf. That is just a wonderful book. And then, of course, Only the Lover Sings by Piper. He has another one, The Abuse of Language, The Abuse of Power. Those are tiny little books that are great to have. You can scatter them about your house, and then when you sit down with your cup of tea in the evening, you sip your tea and you read a little bit of Joseph Piper, and it is all very wonderful. And you're ready for school the next day, right? Okay, I have recommended those. Good. All right, now we have 5 minutes. Someone tell me if any of this applied to anything you experience in your school, because I need to know that. I don't want to go about the country saying things to people if they've not experienced this in their school. Does anyone ever experience adversity in your school? Any difficulties? Or they all go along really smoothly?
This is only my first year as an administrator at the school and my second year at a classical school. But I have noticed with the teachers, and I'm the program coordinator, so I'm not a headmaster or anything, but I do work closely with the teachers and the staff. And we're pretty small, and a lot of the teachers in the past have just been volunteer moms or dads or grandparents, some kind of volunteer teacher, which a lot of them have worked out. I mean, God has provided in ways that you could not imagine. But at the same time, we have also hired people that maybe weren't great for the job, and they may or may not still be there. And so you did talk a lot about like the atmosphere of the school, and while I think it's growing since I've been there, and I'm not saying because I've been there, but I just noticed it since obviously since I've been there for 2 years, but the atmosphere as you walk through the halls, there are people that you know should be there, and then there's people that you're like, because we're at a point where we could potentially hire people, not just take volunteers, and pay people actual money, do we keep the people who have been there? And I'm not the one who makes this call, but it's just something that I notice because you do want to create an environment where people are joyful to be there and where they are exuding God's goodness, not just being a good teacher, because all of our teachers are actually very phenomenal teachers, but it's more like the character of the person that I would question. I'm not trying to say bad things about people, but I'm just saying that was part of your the end of it, which I really did enjoy. But it's a question that I have. Do you working on the character of that person?
I think that you have to work with the administration of your school and have that talk with them. I think that sometimes, and I would be interested to know other people's opinions, I've seen situations where, matter of fact, I was just in El Paso a few weeks ago. The last two schools, I was in El Paso and then in Odessa. And two situations. One had a teacher who wasn't the greatest teacher, but she had her for several years. And she knew that politically speaking, she was related to her and her and her and her. She felt like she couldn't let the teacher go without causing a big upheaval in the school, but she could find another place to put her where she didn't have as much of an influence. And so that was, just a working out of how that particular situation, I mean, there are things that we, and you're praying and still working with that person. The other one had to let the teacher go. Had tried, the administration had tried with the teacher to really help her to come along and do her best, but, it just wasn't there. She would never be a teacher. She would never love the students. It wasn't going to happen. She was miserable. She was unhappy. Everyone knew she was unhappy, although she wanted to retain the position. So I think that, administration works that through. It is a prayerful thing. It is a careful thing. We care about these people, but one thing we also need to realize is as much as we care for that teacher and we think, I don't want to let him go, we need to care for those students. Yeah. So if it's affecting the classroom, then we need to just say, you know what, these parents are paying for this education and we need a good teacher in this classroom. And so, that's where we handle it. We always do it as nicely as we can. But, those are just situations that come up within a school system, different situations that come up. So I can't, I don't know your particular situation. I'm just saying that in different ways we handle that. Although we always, I cannot stress this enough, we are always Christian-like in our letting go of a person if we have to let them go. And they may not react well to that, but we still do our part to say we care about you and want the best for you, but this isn't maybe where you need to be, And we just have to be strong enough to do that. It's leadership. It's not the fun part. So, anybody else?
Well, I was just, to your point, what I was going to say was that one of the roles of a head of school is to recognize that as we start a school, there is, by design, a continuum of growth, right? The founding faculty that you start with starts with a vision and a mission that is still relatively untried. To look at it from a sports aspect, you got to kick the ball somewhere down the field to figure out where you're going to start playing from. But once you get there, you will naturally find out that there are going to be people that are aligned well and other people that are not. And this has nothing to do with the value of the individual.
Sure.
Right.
But it has a lot to do with the responsibility of the head of school to define very clearly mission and vision.
Yeah, right.
So that, and to make sure that as they speak into that, and I really appreciate how you speak to the classics and to the old masters to talk about those ideas, because they found out ways to say those ideas in ways where you can have a good, respectful conversation with someone to help align them, or for them to help recognize that they are able to align themselves, right? Which is a really good way to have a respectful conversation on it. But mission and vision alignment has to become part of the initial selection of anybody who's in staff. Yeah. Just like we want to get mission alignment with a parent,
right?
We must have mission alignment with our faculty as well, and it lives in the head of school.
Yeah.
And so being able to identify that, we talk a lot are in this pedagogy about what is the portrait of a graduate. Well, as a head of a school, we have the responsibility to help speak to what is the portrait of a graduate, but also what does the portrait of a classical parent look like? What does the portrait of a faculty member look like? And to be able to find that and speak to that on almost a daily basis in a way that is uplifting and respectful to our
Yes.
our peers.
And if you're going through a change where you're going from volunteers to hired teachers, that's a different school,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
It really-
When we are running our school with volunteers, we accept them, we're grateful for them, and we're just glad anybody would show up.
That's right.
You get into paid, totally different school. So many things will change.
Yeah,
There's a
Yeah.
lot of responsibility.
Yeah,
accountability.
it's completely different. Okay, we need to go so the other people can come in. Thank you all for coming.